Throughout our entire human history, we've been migrating, we've been moving around. And I've emphasized that with our hunter and gatherer era, but more recently, during globalization, the last 100 years, especially the last 20 to 25 years, a massive amount of international migration has occurred. And so when we think about migration, we've got to understand how it relates to globalization with increasing communication, with advancements in technology and transportation. All of that makes it so much easier to move from one place to another. So when we think about migration, the focus of this chapter, we're going to see a lot of movement across the world, but even within the United States and Indiana. And migration represents a very relevant topic because we think about places. How do places change? For example, Indianapolis. Indianapolis, you could say that occasionally individuals definitely will have an influence. For example, Peyton Manning. He's all of a sudden turned this into a football town. And so individuals play a key role. But we absolutely have to understand how is Indianapolis changing? It's changing because of migration. It's changing because of people moving into new areas and bringing with them, as we learned beforehand, relocation diffusion. People bring with them their beliefs, their culture, their religion, their practices, their values, their material culture. And so when people move into a new area, it's going to cause a place to change. Further, those places in which those people are leaving. And so out migration causes a change in the place as people who typically have lived there no longer do. So we think about migration, its relevancy, we can tie it into relocation diffusion, but it's key to understanding how places change. So this is going to come up later on when we look at the elections. The elections are absolutely crucial as far as the focus is on how do places change. Well, let's look at the migration, let's look at the data. We can look at certain areas that are changing, and so subsequently we need to look at those areas. Is the data changing? Are the voting patterns changing? And this is how elections are won, by understanding where changes is occurring. But we can't think of every single migration, every single experience of a migrant to be the same. We're completely different. So migration, it varies throughout the world. And we'll come back and explain that in the different types of migration. But when we understand migration, we have to understand there's some places in which it's easier to migrate to because of relaxed laws, maybe economic opportunity. Other places might have decline, which is going to force people to migrate, cause them to leave. Other places might have, strict immigration laws in which they don't allow a lot of people to come in. And so that's going to cause minimal change. And so we have to understand the migrant experience, the average migrant experience, it isn't the same. So when we look at all these different migration patterns, we have to understand there's individuals. But with that being said, we can definitely see some general trends in what we call some laws of migration. And our laws are named after a guy named Ravenstein, a geographer who was from Germany/England and came up with his laws of migration in 1885. And so we have to understand he came up with this during the middle of the Industrial Revolution, during that period of rapid urbanization, so a good amount of migration to certain areas, key cities, but also subsequently the industrialization that was fueling that rural to urban migration. So when we think about this as a snapshot in time, this is before the airplane. So we have to consider during the origins of these laws, the time period. And so have things changed? What is the role of globalization? What is the role of improvements in communication, transportation technology? So as we go through each of these laws, we can kind of critique them and apply them to today. First off, the first law, most migrants travel short distances, and that definitely carries on. However, with increasing transportation, we can see more people migrating farther distances or longer distances than ever beforehand. And so while that's still true, most people do travel short distances. What I mean by that, more people migrate somewhere in their area. We are seeing more people that are migrating from one continent to another, from one side of the hemisphere to another. And so this is one of the things, for the most part, this is still true, this law. However, globalization during the era, it definitely has changed. Next up, rural people are more likely to migrate than urban people. And this is still true. We see throughout the world a rural to urban migration, which is urbanization, which is something we'll cover in a later chapter. But that's still true. But we're definitely seeing, if we go ahead and look at the third one, which is kind of related to the second one, long distance migrants are most likely to move to cities. That historically was definitely the case. However, that's starting to change. So you're seeing other cities. It used to be just a few core cities which dominate as far as where migrants would move to. However, we're seeing more of a dispersed pattern. So people that migrate are now moving to suburban areas, moving to second-tier cities, smaller cities, rural towns, college towns, what have you. And so when we look at the changed today. We definitely see more people moving in a dispersed pattern, but yes, that is still true. People do move typically to cities, to urban areas, because those are where jobs are found. Well, next up, we have the fact that long-distance migrants typically are men. That is definitely historical. So that's a snapshot about 100, 150 years ago. Things have slowly changed. In fact, we see more, on average, women traveling. For example, we look at the Philippines. Philippines migrants to the United States are more likely to be female than male. And so this is something you're starting to see more and more of, is more females migrating along with children, which is a different trend than what Ravenstein observed back in the Industrial Revolution. Finally, the last law from Ravenstein is the fact that as people migrate, as people move, they then essentially, let's think about it, they leave a job behind. So they leave for a new job, and so they migrate. They leave their old job behind, and that's going to trigger another migration. It's going to trigger someone migrating to fill that job that they left. And then so subsequently, you kind of have this chain, this counter migration. That's what he refers to in that gap. And so for the most part, some of these rules still carry on, but some of them don't. And so it's a good snapshot to understand migration before we delve in to the actual text.